A Twitter tirade against federal law enforcement. I'm Pam Puso, Fox News. President Trump has had a lot to say on Twitter today, most of it in reference to documents released by the Justice Department that he says confirms his belief that the DOJ and the FBI misled the courts when applying for a FISA warrant to surveil Trump campaign aide Carter Page. The president says the documents were ridiculously redacted, and House Republican Bob Goodlatte agrees.
Most of the information that is redacted in that report should easily be seen by the American people. They can judge for themselves, but I will tell you it does not support the issuance of a warrant against Mr. Page.
Democrats believe the FISA warrant underscores the legitimate concern the FBI had about Page and Russian interference. Congressman Adam Schiff spoke to ABC's George Stephanopoulos.
That application and those renewals have been vindicated in substantial part by Carter Page's own words in a letter I think you asked him about, in which Carter Page acknowledged being an informal advisor to the Kremlin.
President Trump again referred to the Russia investigation as a witch hunt on Twitter. Another police officer has lost his life in the line of duty. Early this morning, an officer in Washington state was struck and killed by a pickup truck while trying to deploy spike strips on a roadway in the city of Kent. Police had been pursuing a suspect after reports of shots fired. It's unclear if the suspect's vehicle is the one that hit the officer. A woman who survived the duck boat accident on a Missouri lake last week is remembering the horror.
When the water filled up the boat, I could no longer see. I couldn't feel anybody. I couldn't see. I just remember, I got to get out. I got to get out.
Tia Coleman lost 9 family members in that disaster. Fox News, fair and balanced.
Are you hiring, posting your position to job sites and waiting for the right people to see it? ZipRecruiter knew there was a smarter way, so they built a platform that finds the right job candidates for you. ZipRecruiter learns what you're looking for, identifies people with the right experience, and invites them to apply to your job. These invitations have revolutionized how you find your next hire. In fact, 80% of employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate through the site in just one day. And ZipRecruiter doesn't stop there. They even spotlight the strongest applications you receive so you never miss a great match. The right candidates are out there. ZipRecruiter is how you find them. Businesses of all sizes trust ZipRecruiter for their hiring needs. Right now, our listeners can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/newscast. That's ZipRecruiter.com/newscast. ZipRecruiter.com/newscast. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. Council.
An experienced sailor who went overboard during a race on Lake Michigan is believed to have died.
This is an enormous tragedy. It's an enormous tragedy to the entire sailing community.
Nick Berberian with the Chicago Yacht Club. Officials say the search for John Santorelli is now a recovery mission. Gunfire outside a Trader Joe's supermarket in Los Angeles leaves one woman dead. Bullets started flying Saturday after a suspect crashed his car outside the store, then ran inside.
The deceased, it's my understanding, this happened in the initial moments of him exiting the vehicle and during the gunfight, if you will, the exchange of gunfire with the officers that were in pursuit. L.A. Police Chief Michael Moore, once inside, police say the suspect held hostages for 3 hours before surrendering. The man was wanted for allegedly shooting his grandmother and girlfriend. An explosion near the airport in the Afghan capital has claimed the lives of at least 11 people. That's according to officials who believe the intended target was the country's first vice president who had just returned from a trip abroad. He was unharmed. Some changes to the communist government in Cuba.
Cuban lawmakers on Saturday approving a cabinet named by new President Miguel Diaz-Canel, keeping most of the ministers from Raul Castro's government in place, except for the key post of economic reform. Cuba's National Assembly also considering a proposed reform to its 1976 constitution that would reshape its government, economy, and courts, creating the position of prime minister alongside the president while maintaining the Communist Party as the sole political force on the island nation. Paul Stevens, Fox News.
Raw turkey is to blame for an ongoing outbreak of salmonella. The meat has sickened dozens of people in 26 states. It's even been found in turkey that's used for pet food. Pam Puso, Fox News Radio.
Do you need dental insurance? Then call Physicians Mutual Insurance Company for details. Not just a discount plan. Real coverage for 350 procedures. Call 1-855-402-7556. Again, that's 1-855-402-7556. Offer is not available in Minnesota, Montana, New Hampshire, New Mexico, Rhode Island, Vermont, and Washington.
From CBC News, The World This Hour, I'm Blake Prendergast. We begin with a secret operation inside Syria. More than 400 people connected to the White Helmets volunteer rescue organization have been covertly pulled out of the country in an operation conducted by Israel. CBC's Dominic Velitis reports on how the mission unfolded.
This was Israel's first intervention in Syria's civil war. Overnight, the Israeli Defense Force, the IDF, evacuated hundreds belonging to the so-called White Helmets to Jordan via the Israeli-occupied Golan Heights. The White Helmets had been working in an area of southwest Syria controlled by rebel forces, but had become trapped by a government offensive. There were fears the volunteers, who've been backed by the United States and its allies for years, would be targeted by Syrian forces as they retook control. The IDF described the operation as an exceptional humanitarian gesture and one carried out at the request of the US and other European nations. Indeed, it's believed the evacuation plans were accelerated after last week's NATO summit in Brussels. The Israeli military said the mission did not reflect a change in Israel's non-intervention policy in Syria's war, in which it considers all warring parties to be hostile. Dominic Velitis, CBC News, London.
Canada has agreed to take in up to 50 White Helmets and their families, around 250 people in total. Foreign Affairs Minister Chrystia Freeland says she raised the issue at the NATO Leaders Summit in Brussels a week ago. In a statement, she says Canada feels a deep moral responsibility toward these brave and selfless people. We're hearing more from the families and victims of the tour boat that sank Thursday in Missouri. 17 people died. 9 of them were from the Coleman family. Ingrid Coleman Douglas said she's haunted by the photo her relatives took just before boarding the boat.
I would just like everyone to know that they were loved and they'll be greatly missed. And that I know God has a reason for everything, but this has been very, very difficult.
Meanwhile, the tour boat operator has voluntarily shut down. In South Africa, gunmen have killed 11 taxi drivers in what police are describing as an ambush. Police say the victims were returning from a funeral for one of their colleagues. Authorities say the motive is not clear, but deep rivalries between South Africa's minibus tour operators have led to violence in the past. The International Monetary Fund is warning that the recent wave of trade tariffs will harm global growth. The head of the IMF, Christine Lagarde, is meeting with G20 finance ministers in Buenos Aires this weekend, and she's trying to show them the impact these restrictions are having on global trade. Even after a targeted campaign by the Canada Revenue Agency, some Canadians appear determined to file their taxes by hand, despite the costs and the impacts. Dean Beebe explains.
The Canada Revenue Agency wants more Canadians to file their taxes online. More than 2 million of us still use paper forms, and they're costly for the CRA to process. So the agency sent letters to 25,000 taxpayers last year as an experiment, urging them to switch to online. Most of the letters talked about saving the environment by using less paper. CBC News got the results of the $36,000 experiment under the Access to Information Act. It turns out the letters prompted just a few hundred Canadians to change their paper ways. And playing the environment card had no impact. A spokesperson for the CRA says the agency did not send any letters out this year. Instead, it has turned to social media and web ads to promote more online filing. Dean Beebe, CBC News, Ottawa.
Reinforcement firefighters and equipment are arriving in Ontario to help with the forest fire situation there. There are 64 active forest fires in the northeastern part of the province. About half of them are listed as out of control. Some people with houses or cottages in the Parry Sound area remain on evacuation alert, and residents near Sudbury have been told to prepare to leave on short notice. That's The World This Hour. I'm Blake Prendergast.
The game doesn't stop. Neither should you. Wherever you go, the game goes too using the enabled FM chip in your phone and the Next Radio app.
The Next Radio app brings real FM radio to your phone.
Just plug in your headphones and listen to the Next Radio app, and you'll save major data and battery life compared to streaming apps. And there are no blackouts, so you never miss the games you love played on your local FM radio station. Download the Next Radio app to enhance your radio listening experience. And keep going. With no blackouts and restrictions, the game follows you. Your favorite team, host, and commentator go with you.
The best thing is, it's all totally free. No subscriptions, no fees. Get off the sidelines and download the Next Radio app today, free.
Next Radio, live and local, wherever you go.
USA Radio News with Chris Barnes.
A woman is dead and a suspect now in custody after a hostage standoff at a food store in Los Angeles Saturday. LA police say a woman fatally shot inside a Trader Joe's, rescued by authorities but later passing away. Police arrested the suspect without incident after long negotiations, which ended kind of strangely. Here's Mayor Eric Garcetti.
The suspect at the end asked for handcuffs. He handcuffed himself and then released himself into the custody of LAPD.
The food store standoff followed a police chase after the suspect allegedly shot his grandmother multiple times. Angry at Trump administration policies against Iran, the Iranian president's warning the U.S. that war with Iran would be the mother of all wars, saying, "Don't play with the lion's tail." This is USA Radio News. President Trump takes to Twitter to address the FBI raid at his former lawyer's office and more. Here's USA Radio's Robin Walensky.
President Trump tweeting about his lawyer, Michael Cohen, who apparently recorded the president about a potential payment to a woman. The president saying on Twitter, inconceivable that the government would break into a lawyer's office early in the morning, almost unheard of. Even more inconceivable that a lawyer would tape a client, totally unheard of and perhaps illegal.
A survivor from the duck boat tragedy in Missouri says the boat captain showed the passengers the life jackets but said they wouldn't need to put them on. At a news conference, Tia Coleman tearfully remembered the family members she lost in that tragedy, saying she's not sure how she made it out alive. She lost 9 of her family members when the boat capsized Thursday night on a lake near Branson, Missouri. Tia's husband and 3 kids among the people who died. And you're listening to USA Radio News. An uneasy ceasefire between Hamas and Israel still in effect in the Gaza Strip. It was relatively calm on Saturday, according to witnesses. The ceasefire announced after a wave of strikes on Hamas targets by Israel in response to the death of an Israeli soldier near the border on Friday. Israel says it has no interest in engaging in another war with Hamas, but says it will not tolerate the Gaza militant campaign of flying rockets into Israel on a regular basis. Former NASA astronaut, second man to walk on the moon, Buzz Aldrin, noticeably absent from a Saturday night gala to kick off a year-long celebration of the 50-year anniversary of the first moon landing, even though his nonprofit Space Education Foundation is a sponsor of the event. That black-tie Apollo celebration gala was held under a Saturn V rocket at the Kennedy Space Center, and hundreds of people attended. Aldrin's absence, though, comes just a month after he sued 2 of his adult children and a former business manager, accusing them of misusing his credit cards, transferring money from an account, and slandering him, saying he has dementia. And weeks ago, Andrew and Jan Aldrin did file a petition claiming the 88-year-old was suffering from memory loss, paranoia, and confusion. Andrew Aldrin acknowledging his father's absence at the gala, saying, "We're sorry, Dad can't be here." You can find us online anytime at usaradio.com for USA Radio News. I'm Chris Barnes.
There are a ton of social networking websites, but one stands apart for a very special reason. This one saves lives. It's MatchingDonors.com. MatchingDonors.com links organ donors with people in need of kidney and other transplants. In the U.S., 19 people die each day waiting for an organ transplant, most of them for kidneys. If you've ever considered becoming a living organ donor, or if you have someone in need of an organ transplant, visit MatchingDonors.com. Home of the greatest gift of all, the gift of life. MatchingDonors.com.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Barbara Klein. The Justice Department has made the unprecedented move of releasing documents from the FBI's request to a special court for permission to surveil former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page. NPR's Mara Liasson reports President Trump is claiming the documents confirm the investigation into Russian election interference is a rigged witch hunt.
This is the first FISA wiretap application ever made public. The declassified document was heavily redacted, but it shows that the application relied on evidence that Russia had tried to recruit Page back in 2013. It also relied on evidence from that dossier compiled by a former British intelligence agent. President Trump tweeted this morning that the document proves his campaign was spied on. Republicans, in an effort to discredit the origins of the whole Russia investigation, have been saying that the FBI abused its power because it relied improperly on the dossier. Democrats say the FISA application was appropriate. Mara Liasson, NPR News.
Industry groups in Germany are again warning the Trump administration not to impose more tariffs. Esme Nicholson reports the renewed criticism comes ahead of EU Commission's president's visit to the White House later this week.
Dieter Kempf, chair of Germany's largest industry association, warns that the United States will end up harming itself with tariffs on European cars and car parts. He added that the German auto industry alone employs more than 118,000 people in the US and that 60% of cars produced there are exported. Germany's economy minister Peter Altmaier said Sunday he hopes a solution can be found because trade between Europe and the United States makes up a third of all global trade. He said while tariffs on aluminium and steel had a volume of just over €6 billion annually, car tariffs would amount to 10 times that figure. For NPR News, I'm Esme Nicholson in Berlin.
Sweden continues to battle dozens of wildfires as a massive heat wave and historic drought grips northern Europe. Terry Schultz reports.
Firefighters from around Europe worked overnight to try to get some 80 forest fires under control in Sweden, which is experiencing record drought. They've managed to cut the number of blazes roughly in half. The director of Sweden's Civil Contingencies Agency says while there's been some progress, there's no reason to be too optimistic. Unusually hot temperatures are due to rise even higher this week. Sweden's mobilized its armed forces against the blazes and asked its European Union partners for backup. France, Germany, Italy, and Lithuania have sent water-bombing aircraft. Denmark and Poland have dispatched firefighters and vehicles, with other countries on standby in case the situation continues to worsen. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
This is NPR. The G20 meeting of finance ministers is wrapping up in Buenos Aires today, with the U.S. defending new trade tariffs. France and other countries warn U.S. trade policies are risking global growth, and they're calling for more dialogue. Trade and economic expansion are topping the agenda of Chinese President Xi Jinping, who's in Africa on a four-nation tour. He's promising billions of dollars in loans and investment. As NPR's Anthony Kuhn reports from Beijing, it's all part of China's plan for a new Silk Road.
Xi Jinping expressed confidence in China-Africa ties in Senegal, his first stop on the tour. China says it invested $100 million in Senegal last year. It's built a highway, for example, linking the capital Dakar with its second city, Touba. His fourth trip to Africa as president will also take him to Rwanda, South Africa, and Mauritius. China dismisses criticism that its lending to developing nations is leaving them awash in debt. Africa is a key part of Beijing's so-called Belt and Road strategy to link continents with ports, railways, and energy projects, ensuring that all roads lead to China. Anthony Kuhn, NPR News, Beijing.
The British Open Golf Championship wraps up today in Scotland. Wins are picking up. 3 Americans, Kevin Kisner, Xander Schauffele, and Jordan Spieth, started the day tied atop the leaderboard. But former world number 1 Tiger Woods is also in contention. He's going for his 15th major championship. I'm Barbara Klein, NPR News in Washington.
Do you or a loved one have a chronic condition such as diabetes, a heart condition, or asthma? Do you or a loved one have a severe allergy to a certain food, drug, or insect? If you answer yes to any of these questions, you are a candidate for an electronic medical alert watch, the alternative to the traditional medical ID bracelet. An electronic medical alert watch visibly communicates a person's health conditions, drug, food, and other allergies, and other critical information to help make a diagnosis and save a life. Take control of your health. Protect yourself or your loved ones and order an electronic medical alert watch today. Visit www.epill.com. That's epill.com. Affordable, free shipping, and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Remember, www.epill.com. That's EPILL.com. ePill.
On this edition for Saturday, July 21st, the political pressures motivating Russia and what it means for U.S.-Russia relations. Health insurers are buying large amounts of data that raise privacy and discrimination concerns. And Greece climbing back from economic disaster as its citizens pay the price. Next on PBS News Hour Weekend.
From the Tisch WNET studios at Lincoln Center in New York, Hari Srinivasan.
Good evening and thanks for joining us. President Trump is at his New Jersey golf course today for the second weekend in a row. He started his day with a tweet, this time about the recording of a phone conversation with his former personal lawyer, Michael Cohen. Mr. Trump said the news that his lawyer made recordings is, quote, totally unheard of and perhaps illegal. He also claimed, quote, your favorite president did nothing wrong. Cohen, whose office was raided by federal authorities in April, reportedly made a secret recording of a conversation with then-candidate Donald Trump 2 months before the 2016 election. According to the New York Times and others, Cohen and Trump reportedly discussed a potential payment to former Playboy model Karen McDougal, who said she had an affair with Mr. Trump in 2006. Most states, including New York State, where Mr. Cohen's office is located, allow the recording of phone conversations with the consent of only one party. Russia is urging the United States to release Maria Butina, an alleged Russian agent, calling the charges against her, quote, fabricated. In a phone call with U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo today, Foreign Minister Sergei Lavrov called Butina's arrest earlier this week unacceptable. In court this week, federal prosecutors accused 29-year-old Butina, a gun rights activist, of using close ties to U.S. political organizations to work covertly for the Kremlin. Butina has pleaded not guilty. It's been a dizzying series of statements in the week following the President Trump-President Putin meeting in Helsinki, and speculation continues about what the two men actually talked about one-on-one last Monday for more than 2 hours. The White House press secretary called it the beginning of a dialogue with Russia. The State Department said no agreements were reached. And Mr. Trump declared vaguely that many positive things will come out of that meeting. So what do the Russians think, and what do they want going forward? Joining me now is Kimberly Martin, director of the program on U.S.-Russia relations at Columbia University and a professor of political science at Barnard College. So first, what is the mood on the streets in Russia, and how does that play into what Vladimir Putin wants?
Well, it was initially seen as a huge triumph that he was able to be treated equally by the United States president. That's what Russia has long wanted, was to be treated seriously as somebody who is a necessary player in any kind of discussion about international security. And now the reality is sort of starting to sink in, and people are realizing that, in fact, Trump's performance did not go over well in the United States. And they're saying, uh-oh, what might that mean? And there is now concern. There are a couple of different bills that are pending in Congress on increasing the sanctions. Mm-hmm. And people are wondering what kind of sanctions are going to happen next. And so it's maybe maybe a letdown a little bit.
Well, what was the impact of those sanctions on the Russian economy? I mean, it is nowhere close to parallel to the U.S. It's much, much smaller. But that seems to be one of the things that Putin is very interested in, relieving that tension, that stress.
Yes, I think that's why he called for this meeting of business leaders on both sides. And we know that the sanctions are having an impact on Russia, without question, especially they're having an impact on the oil and natural gas industry. But what really is making the Russian economy weak is a combination of continuing corruption, which adds sort of a tax to every kind of deal that's made because people have to always pay off somebody on the side, and then just the failure to restructure away from state ownership of these huge oil and natural gas and mineral companies as being the center of the economy. So Russian laws right now don't really encourage small and medium business owners to be at all, proactive or innovative.
So what about the idea of future summits? What has to happen to make those summits perhaps more effective?
Well, one thing that was really missing, I think, in this summit was a sense of lower-level experts getting together to talk things through before the two people in chief got together to talk, before Putin and Trump got together to talk. And so it's good news that we think that Pompeo and Lavrov, the Secretary of State on the U.S. side and the Minister of Foreign Affairs on the Russian side, have started talking about by telephone about what might happen next. We need a lot more of that. We need the basis of the conversation to be worked out before Trump and Putin actually get together to talk about things, so that they're just putting the icing on the cake rather than trying to work out the technical details between themselves.
Now, what are the tensions or the forces that are at work in Russia right now that Putin has to be responsive to in terms of his public, the policies that are out there?
Well, it's a very different situation from the United States because he doesn't actually have to worry about being reelected, for example. But he does have to worry about what his base thinks of him. And his base is ordinary people, ordinary workers, and ordinary pensioners. And that's really significant in what's happening recently because there is a law that might be going forward that would raise the pension age in Russia. For men, it would be going up from 60 to 65. And the reason that matters is that Russian men still have a tendency to die much younger than their counterparts in the rest of the developed world. And so there's a lot of pushback against this idea coming from ordinary people who are going out and protesting. But, for this whole thing, having a win on the foreign policy stage takes people's attention maybe off of what's happening domestically, and he can go back and say that he's the man who made Russia great again, and maybe try to get some of this popularity back that has slipped in recent weeks because of the pension reform question.
All right. Kimberly Martin of Columbia University and Barnard College, thanks so much for joining us.
Thank you, Hari.
At a meeting of global economic and finance officials today in Buenos Aires, U.S. Treasury Secretary Steve Mnuchin told reporters the Trump administration's trade policies are not affecting overall growth. But he did say some sectors of the American economy are being hurt. Mnuchin said the government is working on ways to help farmers and industries being targeted by other countries as retaliation for increased tariffs. Officials also said they expect discussions over the tariffs the U.S. and China are imposing on goods and what the U.S. calls China's unfair trade practices. A woman from Cameroon found in the wreckage of a capsized migrant boat in the Mediterranean Sea arrived in Spain today to receive medical care. The humanitarian group Proactiva Open Arms rescued the woman, who was found with the bodies of another woman and a toddler. The survivor said she and the two others were left behind after a Libyan Coast Guard ship rescued 158 people from a deflating dinghy. Libya's Coast Guard denied abandoning anyone at sea. The rescue group requested a safe port in Spain after Italy said it would take in the woman, but not the two dead bodies. Read the story behind NASA's upcoming Parker Solar Probe on our website, pbs.org/newshour. 8 years ago, the Greek financial crisis threatened the stability of not only the 19-member Eurozone, but the global economy as well. Now, Greece appears to be on the verge of something some never thought possible. With budget surpluses each of the last 3 years, it's about to exit the historic multi-billion-dollar bailout program that's been keeping it afloat. The Greek government calls it a success, but it's come at a high price for the Greek people, as special correspondent Christopher Livesay reports from Athens.
On a recent evening in an upscale neighborhood of Athens, we followed Tina Papoti to see what is an increasingly common phenomenon here in Greece, a surprise tax inspection
The thing that we want to see right now is if the businessmen issue their receipts.
Poti works for Greece's Independent Authority for Public Revenue, which was set up just last year to tackle tax evasion, an enormous problem costing tens of billions of dollars a year. Tax evasion has been so widespread here, politicians jokingly refer to it as a national sport. But that's changing. Tax inspectors are increasing pressure on businesses to record sales and pay tax to the government.
This is our job, and we have to do it correct. This is the law. We have to learn to respect the law.
In fact, tax reform is one of several measures Greece has been forced to adopt in exchange for bailouts that have kept the country afloat for the past 8 years. Bailouts which will come to an end next month. Now economists are anxious to see if Greece is strong enough to stand on its own. There's a lot at stake, says Panos Chakoglu, a professor at Athens University of Economics and Business. How big have the bailouts been in Greece? How much money has it taken on loan?
Altogether, the loans exceed 260 billion euros.
More than 260 billion euros. That's an enormous number. Put that in perspective for me.
This is something that is by far the largest loan ever given in history. And in order to give you some kind of an order of magnitude, there is an international organization that has, let's say, this role of bailing out. This is the International Monetary Fund. If you take the 4 or 5 largest loans ever given out, countries like Brazil, Argentina, Russia, and so on, of the IMF, still they do not sum up to the amount of money given to Greece.
To understand why such large bailouts were needed, Chakoglu says you have to consider how grim things looked at the start of the Greek financial crisis in 2010. With its huge deficits, a bloated public sector, and billions in uncollected taxes, Greece was already the financial sick man of the European Union. Then it came to light that Greece had been underreporting its debt for years. Just as the world economy was beginning to recover from the global financial crisis, Greece was on the verge of bankruptcy.
If there was a collapse of Greece, that would have meant, let's say, the collapse of several other large banks that had lent to Greece. This means, let's say, that the global economy would have gone into a spiral.
To save Greece, the so-called Troika, the European Central Bank, the European Commission, and the IMF agreed to authorize billions in loans on the condition that Greece enact strict fiscal reforms and austerity measures. Public sector jobs and pensions would have to be cut. Taxes increased. Greece was put on a strict budget. But as bad as it was in 2010, by 2015, it was even worse when a new government came into office promising to end unpopular austerity measures and threatening to default on the loan program if it didn't get better terms.
At that time, Greece was on the brink of leaving not only the Eurozone, but possibly the European Union too.
Greece was actually considering leaving the Eurozone.
Quite openly, some of the ministers were advocating return to the drachma, which means, let's say, that perhaps after Greece there would be other countries that would follow and the euro will collapse.
A domino effect.
Precisely. This would have been very likely to have effects for the entire financial system of the world.
It was a stalemate, with the average Greek citizen in the middle, worried their life savings might be wiped out. At the height of the crisis, Greeks were panicked they'd be kicked out of the Eurozone and started withdrawing their savings at an alarming rate. In order to keep banks from imploding, the government put limits on the amount of money people could withdraw. Only 60 euros per day. That's roughly $70. Eventually, the Greek government gave in, agreeing to continue reforms and austerity measures in exchange for a final bailout. But it's been hard on the Greek people, who regularly take to the streets to protest. Pensions and other welfare payments have been cut up to 70%. The size of the public sector reduced by 1/4. Thousands are threatened with loss of their homes to foreclosure. And unemployment, which at one time hit 28%, is still high at around 20%. Among the hardest hit are Greece's next generation. Youth unemployment is above 40%. As a result, tens of thousands of young Greeks have gone abroad looking for work. Others, like Kostas and Elmarousis, headed for the hills. You studied history.
Yes.
And now you're herding goats in the country. That doesn't sound like a typical career path.
No, it's difficult to do career here.
It's difficult to follow your career.
Yes, because we don't have jobs to work here. It's difficult. very difficult.
Russi says he would make only about $470 a month as a professional archaeologist, so he and his wife decided that living off the land was a better option.
It's better money and better life.
Still, he doesn't earn much and says he's paying more in taxes now than before the crisis. How much money did you make last year?
20,000.
20,000
Yes.
euros. And how much did you pay in taxes?
10,000.
10,000 euros. So of the 20,000 euros you made last year, half of it went to the government in taxes.
Yes.
That's a lot of money.
It's a lot of money. It's too many taxes. I have taxes for my car. I have taxes for my buildings. I have taxes from the salary of the year. Too many taxes. So if you gather this all the year, you give to them 50%.
Of course, I understand that some categories of the population are heavily taxed.
This is the presidential palace. Dimitrios Chanakopoulos is Greece's government spokesperson. He says the bailout money is being used to pay off the government's loans. And he acknowledges that while the country has succeeded in maintaining a budget surplus the last 3 years by raising revenues and cutting spending, the average Greek is paying a high price for the crisis. I spent the morning with a goat herder who, just to give you some context, he told us that last year he made 20,000 euros. 10,000 of those had to go to taxes, so he's left to live off of 10,000 euros. I mean, there are a lot of people like him in Greece suffering right now.
Yeah. I understand that. The burden of the crisis is heavy. People had to go through sacrifices all those years, and we try to do our best in order to heal some of the wounds of the crisis. As for the taxes, the taxation average in Greece is around 42%, whereas in Belgium, which is the highest in Europe, is 53%. In Germany is 48%. In France is around 50%.
Of course, in those European countries, social services like healthcare are considered very good. Not so in Greece. Dr. Christos Yogalas is a surgeon in a well-funded private hospital, but he says public hospitals in Greece are in bad shape.
Funding for public healthcare has been slashed, has been reduced. It was already low, then it has been reduced further, and that coupled with the lack of organization has resulted in a significant reduction in the healthcare available to most people.
His wife Amanda agrees. She's also a surgeon, a resident in a public hospital in Athens, where she makes less than $4 an hour.
The conditions are not good. We're on a constant basis of lacking materials, of gauzes, of most basic things we don't have. So that makes my job hard.
Yorgalas knows he and his family are much better off than most, but he worries about the future of his country.
There has been a lot of damage done into the social fabric. A lot of people have paid a very high price for the crisis, especially the ones who are already living at the edges.
Do you think that those who have suffered the most have a better future now that they've gone through this crisis, now that the bailouts are coming to an end? Will things get better?
To build a successful society, I think you need some basic premises. You need a fair society, you need an egalitarian society, you need to have a strong social support system, a good public health system, a good public education. None of this exists. I don't think of any country which has managed to advance without having this. So I don't know how Greece will progress.
But he will soon find out. August 20th is the expected end of the bailout period and the start of Greece having more control of its own economic policy. Greece has been assured no or low interest rates on its loans through 2032. It may never pay it all back and will be monitored closely by its creditors. There are doubts Greece can maintain economic growth in the long term and that things will get better for the average Greek citizen. But for now, the government is breathing a sigh of relief that the worst may be behind them.
After 8 years of a tragedy that we had to go through, now we are ready to return to European normality, so to speak. But I think that the struggle doesn't end on the 20th of August. We have many things to do and many things to change in Greece in order for the recovery to be sustainable and viable in the future.
What you pay for health insurance is increasingly a complex web of formulas. And now your personal data, everything from where you live to what clothing you buy to your magazine subscriptions, may factor into what you pay or whether you get coverage at all. In a series of reports co-published with NPR, the investigative nonprofit news organization ProPublica is looking into the strategies insurance companies are using. And joining us now from Denver is ProPublica reporter Marshall Allen. Marshall, first, what sorts of data are they looking at, and what sort of inferences can they make from that?
Well, that's a good question, Hari. They're looking at all different types of personal and proprietary and public information, the kinds of things that people would normally assume to be private. And I bet probably most of the viewers in your audience right now are having their data gathered by the data brokers that are teaming up with the health insurance companies to analyze this. And so the data that they're gathering would include your education record, your property records, any debts you might have, your income level, your race and ethnicity, even social media interactions, they're gathering those. So they're gathering all this information and they're putting it into these complex computer algorithms, and then they're spitting out predictions about how much we might cost based on all these economic and lifestyle attributes.
So give me some examples.
Well, so for example, some of the inferences they make are creepy, I guess. You could say this kind of turns the creepiness level up a bit. For example, they can tell if a woman has changed her name. And so they say if a woman has changed her name in the last 24 months, she may have recently gotten married, or maybe she recently got divorced. And so she could be considering, getting pregnant soon, or maybe she's stressed from that divorce, and so she's going to have a lot of mental health care costs. Or, if you're a low-income minority, they would assume that you are living in a dangerous and dilapidated neighborhood, and so you could be at higher risk of health cost. Or another one is if a woman has bought plus-size clothing, they would predict that she might be more likely to be depressed, which could also lead to higher healthcare costs. So these are things that they're looking at trends in the data for groups of people, and then they're attributing the inferences to individuals within that group. And kind of one of the fundamental problems is that for any individual, this could just be wrong.
And so what if they're wrong about this? You're still going to be falling into a bracket based on this group and the suspicion that they have that you are part of it?
Yeah, they're scoring us and predicting our healthcare costs based on the groups that we fall into. And so, I went to LexisNexis and obtained, they'll give you a certain portion of your data. Mm-hmm. And it was like a creepy walk down memory lane for me. They had data for me going back 25 years to the address of the home I grew up in Golden, Colorado, all my old phone numbers. And with each of the addresses, they had a little indicator there. Was this a high-risk neighborhood or not? And, I grew up in a middle-class kind of environment, so I didn't grow up in any high-risk neighborhoods, but it made me wonder what if I had. And when I talked to the industry, they promise that they're only using this information for the purpose of helping people. So that what they would say, their argument for doing this, is that they can do better case management. But just as it could be used for good, it could also be used to discriminate. And the health insurance industry has a long history of discriminating against sick people that still goes on to this day.
Marshall Allen of ProPublica joining us from Denver today. It is part of a year-long reporting project called the Health Insurance Hustle. You can find it on their websites. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, Hari.
This is PBS News Hour Weekend, Saturday.
In Britain, the big butterfly count is underway. Conservation groups are asking the public to spend a few minutes each day watching for butterflies to help understand how the dry summer weather may be affecting them. The number of butterflies in the UK collapsed after a drought in 1976, so the nationwide count is a way to see if the changing climate is having an impact, as we hear now from ITV's Miranda Shunka.
Happily feeding amongst the flowers, butterflies are basking in the best summer conditions for more than a decade. But the long run of dry weather is also posing a major threat for many species once common in our towns and cities. For naturalist Sir David Attenborough, why it's good reason to take a pause and enjoy a simple pleasure.
The natural world is a source of great joy and delight and comfort. Just to take off 15 minutes every now and again, find a nice patch of sunshine, sit there and think of nothing but, what butterfly is that and counting them. It's very good for the soul. It's very good for the spirit.
But there is concern as butterfly numbers in the UK collapsed after the drought back in 1976. So wildlife watchers are now hoping to assess what the current climate may mean for their long-term survival.
It's all for a big butterfly count taking place over the next 3 weeks. Conservation experts calling on people to get out into their garden for even 15 minutes, record what they see and help themselves in the process.
There's some research around anxiety and depression that can really help, but for most people actually taking that time can be really helpful. And it doesn't always have to be something really dramatic like, going for a big walk in the countryside. People can do really small things that suit them in their life.
So a chance for time out and to enjoy the benefits of what nature can provide. Miranda Shunker, ITV News.
Finally tonight, Julian Assange, the founder of WikiLeaks, may soon be ejected from Ecuador's embassy in London, where he's been since 2012. The Intercept, an investigative news organization, and the Russian news agency RT report that Ecuador's president is in Great Britain finalizing the agreement to turn Assange over to British authorities. Assange faces a minor charge in the UK. Sweden withdrew a sex crimes investigation into Assange last year. There is no word on whether he would be extradited to the United States, where he currently faces no charges. However, members of the Trump administration have said they want to crack down on leakers. That's all for this edition of PBS News Hour Weekend. I'm Hari Srinivasan. Thanks for watching. Have a good night.
Hey, it's Steve Harvey here for the Illinois Broadcasters Association, and in a recent survey, the Illinois Emergency Management Agency was asked to name the top 5 items that every Illinois family needs to have in their home's emergency disaster kit. Check out these answers. Water, can't live without it. Number 2, non-perishable food. Well, after all, a man gotta eat, right? Number 3, weather radio, and make sure you got fresh batteries too. Number 4, flashlight. Even more reason to have fresh batteries on hand. Number 5, first aid kit. Look, there's no reason to feud over what items to put in your family's emergency disaster kit. Get the answers and more at ready.illinois.gov. That's ready.illinois.gov.
Sponsored by the Illinois Emergency Management Agency, aired in cooperation with the Illinois Broadcasters Association and this station.
Early to bed, early to rise makes a man healthy, wealthy, and wise.
And all was Benjamin Franklin wise.
So you actually think electricity can pass through metal? Ha! Ben Franklin, go fly a kite.
Excellent idea. Where are my keys?
Besides the bifocals, Ben invented the Franklin stove, the odometer, and the lightning rod. Ingenuity, pass it on. From the Foundation for a Better Life at values.com.
This is Betty White. I know you don't need one more thing to worry about, but listen, high blood pressure can cause kidney damage, blindness, heart attack, stroke, and you can have high blood pressure even if you feel all right. 1 in 7 adults has it, but it's easy to get your blood pressure checked, and you can treat it if it is too high. So don't worry about it, don't ignore it, just see your doctor and check it out.
For your free booklet, visit the Will Rogers Institute at wrinstitute.org and find us on Facebook and Twitter.
Hi everybody, it's Stefan Molyneux from Freedomain Radio. Are you ready to ramble? I hope so, because, man, I don't know if it's like a 50 thing. 50 years old, by golly. But my brain is breaking away from the present, and it's like swimming back upstream like a salmon looking out to crap a few eggs and make a whole bunch of new salmon. It's a weird thing. I'm falling backwards through time at the moment. And I've been doing a bunch of reading on genetics and personality and how much of who we are is, some of our personality is water and some of it is the container. And the water can slosh around in the container, but it can't change the shape of the container. And some of the mysteries of my early life that were confusing at the time and for which I thought I had answers, I am reopening these wounds. Some of them are real wounds. And going back to look at the origin narrative of my existence it's like happening against my will. Like my mind is just tumbling backwards through time and examining days long dead and sometimes people long gone. And one of them, I'm going to call him Bob. And Bob was a friend of mine from about the age of 12 to about the age of 14. We met in school, and we both had some similar interests, and we hung out. And Bob was funny, engaging, fairly smart, a little cold-hearted, a little nutty at times, and I definitely had the amygdala storm. Like just when he would get upset, there would just be this irrepressible storm. And we went, I don't know if this is, I mean, we went through puberty together. I mean, it's not like we were whipping out and comparing pubes or anything, but we just went through puberty together, and that's kind of like a big deal. Like I remember being out on a tennis court when I got me some whiskers. Like I went through puberty together. That's kind of, in a sense, a biochemical trial by fire or something like that. And we both had the challenge. Well, his family had more money. He was the only child of a single mom. Only son of a single mom. That is not a good combination in my experience. That's generally pretty negative in terms of life outcomes. And his was particularly disastrous, as we'll get to in a bit. So we had the challenge of no money. You get no money. I had jobs, so I wasn't as available. I got jobs from the age of 12 onwards. And in Canada. And he didn't, but we had the challenge. We had to, so dirt biking became like a big thing. So he was able to afford, like his family, his mom was able to buy him a dirt bike. I had to kind of piece one together out of crap I found in garbage dumps and stuff like that. And he had a cool dirt bike with shock absorbers and so on. And he was a wild rider, like a wild rider. If you ever watch these sort of home videos or funny videos or fail army or whatever, I mean, there are people who just do these nutty things. And for the life of me, I cannot figure out why. Why, Jackie Chan face? Why would you do these things? You know, you're not getting paid for them. I mean, why are you trying to bike off this thing? Why are you trying to do this skateboard down these railings and so on? And I just never quite, I mean, I like doing cool tricks on the bike and all that. But I've just never understood this. Like for me, when I was a kid, we had skateboards, right? And skateboards were not for like the seeming goal with skateboards these days is to flip them around 19 times and then embed them in your groin and not really go anywhere. But we had, when I was a kid, in England, we lived on this, it's called an estate, but it really is not, it's not Downton Abbey, it's not what you're thinking of. And there was sort of the apartments or the flats at the top, and then there were like the low rent Jim Morrison style cottages, bungalows down at the bottom, which is where the guys with the shirtless, the sleeveless shirts called the wife beaters and so on, they hung around on welfare and drinking a lot during the day and playing a lot of rock and roll music and snarling at anyone who got on the tattered remnants of their lawns. And there was a pathway, a sort of circular curling pathway that went from the top of the estate down to the bungalows at the bottom, which was like Mordor for me. Like it was really, I mean, it was a pretty dark and sinister place. You didn't spend much time down there if you could avoid it. This was, I guess, a generation into the welfare state, and it was just fading. Like it was considered to be shameful, but it was just, now it became sort of like you're a sucker if you work kind of thing. The culture had adapted to the law, as it generally does. Rarely for the better. And culture adapts positively to the diminishment of laws, almost never positively to the expansion of laws. And we used to get on our skateboards, and again, mine was a found one. We get on our skateboards, and we would get handful of sticks, and we would go down this sort of curving hill, which was a real challenge. And there was these metal bars. I remember going into, when I built a go-kart with pram wheels and wood and all that, I remember going into that go-kart with my knees up around my chest and like dong, like the metal went into my shins. And man, getting a barked shin is a special kind of hell. I'd rather have an ice cream headache than a barked shin. That's, an ice cream headache. A friend of mine used to make jokes. If you could will ice cream headaches on people, you could actually just rule the world, because everybody would do whatever the hell you wanted just to avoid a continuation of the ice cream headache, which I actually kind of agree with. I had a brain freeze the other day when having a smoothie with my daughter, because, she has moderation and I'm still working on it. But we would go down with these handful of sticks on our skateboards, and we would try and drop them in front of each other. Because if you got the right size stick and you dropped it at the right angle, then this person's skateboard would stop. It would just stop. And then they'd go flying off their skateboard. So we would go down trying to win a race and then trying to drop these sticks, and then you'd have to dodge the sticks and so on. It was a blast. My God. Childhood was rough and great in many ways. It was rough at home and great out. So, yeah, Bob and I went through puberty together, and I remember walking down. This is a very, very vivid memory for me. This is walking along Don Mills Road, opposite from the mall, between Eglinton and Lawrence. And we were walking down this hill, then across the street. This is where I used to have a paper route. And we were probably 13 or so, real freaks and geeks territory. And these two cute girls walked by. And I turned around, and my friend and I both turned around to check them out, and saw that they had turned around to check us out. Oh, glory be! I have my first scrap of sexual market value. Praise be Lord. So I just remember that being it's one of these, It was my first tiny sliver of game, or at least the possibility of game. And that's, going through the puberty thing and talking about girls and questioning, whether you're attractive, how attractive you are. And trust me, you're always way more attractive looking back in time then. I came across some old pictures. I'll post them someday. I came across some old pictures of me as a teenager. I'm like, it's true. You look back, you have all these insecurities at the time. You're like, pretty good looking kid. So we had the challenge of filling up time with no money. And he was, of course, partly constrained by I had no money. And it was a challenge. This is back in the day. Oh, man. For $1.90, you could go downtown and see a movie. $1.90. I remember this very clearly. Because I remember I got locked out. I had money. I had $4 in the house, so we could both go down, because it was 20 cents on the bus and $1.50 to get into the movie. They used to have $2 Tuesdays, but it was $1.50 to get in. We wanted to go see Rocky. Rocky came out, which was, it's a good film, but what it did do was stimulate a lot of working out among people, which, had its benefits, certainly did for me. And I remember we got locked out. And I was a lot of times getting locked out as a kid, because I would lose my keys. And I would be too terrified to tell my mom that I'd lost my keys. And so I would just keep leaving the door unlocked and then hope that it stayed unlocked and all that kind of stuff, right? Even though my name wasn't on my keys, my mom would think somehow someone had her keys and therefore they'd be able to get in, and right? So we were locked out, and we wanted to go and see Rocky. And I remember I had a card, and we were trying to break into my own apartment with this guy. Anyway, so for the most part, he would, I didn't have any money, so he wouldn't do stuff that involved money. And we both kind of got into video games, which was a big thing for me when I was a kid. The bowling alley, long gone from Don Mills, wherein I got into some trouble. Another time. So we did a lot of dirt biking. There probably still are. I guess I was last walking these trails about 15 years ago. But in the Don Valley, back in behind Don Mills School and so on, there's great paths. Really great paths. And great for dirt biking and hiking. And I used to spend a lot of time out there walking, because, you can walk and talk, which is a great thing I love to do, as you can imagine. That's why I stand by to do these shows. And sitting is the new smoking. But we would dirt bike a lot. And it wasn't really, again, I'm not really that much into tricks, because I have the capacity to see consequences and costs and benefits, and the consequences were highly negative and the benefits were highly dubious, and the costs, right? So, but he was a crazy guy on the dirt bike. And we had sort of kind of ups and downs when it came to our relationship. His temper was pretty significant, and he would get, like, he'd sort of push his mom up against the wall, and a lot of aggression, and I wasn't really down for that. So I'd take sort of breaks, and anyway, then, again, he's very charismatic, very funny. And so we'd end up hanging out again. Some of this frenemy stuff, this make-up, break-up stuff for relationships, male and female, like sort of same-sex friendships and so on. It can happen. But yeah, he had a cold side for sure. So I didn't have any gloves. Right. And look, I wasn't so poor that we could never afford gloves. But what happened is if I lost my gloves, I wouldn't say anything. It was constant hiding of disasters. Who last had the flashlight? We need the flashlight. It was you. Ha! Right. I mean, this NKVD parenting style was not unknown in my household. So I can't remember if we didn't have gloves. I lost gloves, but we went dirt biking in some really crazy cold November day. It was November, I think. We went dirt biking. My hands, just frozen claws. And I remember saying to Bob, he had these, big, giant oven mitt hockey gloves. And I remember saying, listen, can I just, 5 minutes? Let me have them for 5 minutes, warm my hands up. He's like, why didn't you bring your gloves? When you're a poor kid or you don't have access to stuff, well, sometimes they're tempted to make things up and say, well, I left them here. Like you claim incompetence rather than poverty, because incompetence is somehow less shameful, right, than poverty, because poverty indicates, often indicates a not very positive gene pool, or, anyway, you take it personally because that which causes the poverty in your parents is partly mixed up in you. And anyway, and he wouldn't let me have the gloves. And it was that kind of stuff where I'd be like, forget, I'm not hanging out with, I got other friends. And then, something would happen to hang out together or whatever, right? And we built a train set together. I remember that. I loved trains, model trains. And I remember his mom had a boyfriend who had a cottage. And he had a train set. Fantastic. And I was very, very excited about the train set. And honestly, no idea where I got all this stuff from. I remember doing the papier-mâché, the chicken wire, the newspapers, and building the mountains, and that was fantastic. I actually slept under the train set because we had a pretty small apartment, and the train set was above me. I slept under the train set because otherwise I wouldn't have had any room for it because no basement. I live in a flat. And it sounds it sounds ridiculous, but this is back in the days of innocence. We had a model train I had a model train on the train set. Some of them were his. And I have presents and so on. I have friends whose parents were a little richer would get me stuff for my birthday. I know that's how I accumulated some of it. And secondhand stores as well, garage sales, and I pick up stuff from there. But we had one train that constantly fell off the track. It would go around the corner, right? This is, again, it sounds ridiculous. This is how naive we were. We called it jerk off because it kept jerking itself off the tracks every time you go jerk off. And we were on the phone talking about this toy train called jerk off. And I remember someone's parents, I can't remember whose, got very upset because obviously they didn't know what we were talking about in the context. We were talking about it, and I don't know. It's just kind of funny. But that exploration of sexual market value, which happens when you go through puberty, is pretty important. So he was a funny guy, but he was cold when interests collided. And he also, he had a pretty kind mom in many ways. I think she was out of her depth. I mean, he had wild energy. He had, I think, a lot of masculinity. Like, he was a dude. And, the sense of risk-taking, some of the coldness. I mean, but his mom was kind of out of her depth in terms of trying to control him, trying to manage him, and so on. And this was the aggression that I don't think she had much of a capacity to handle in any kind of productive way out of her depth. But she did have some real kindness. I remember for my 13th birthday, I was, out doing my thing and came home and got progressively more morose. Over the course of the evening, I remember my mom saying, well, what's the matter? And I said, well, Bob's mom It's not his real name. And Bob's mom was the only person the entire day who remembered that it was my birthday. And that was rough, you know. You know, this is back in the days when, you know, birthdays really meant something. And I remember she gave me $5 for my birthday. And you know how long I held onto that $5 for? I mean, I had a lot I could have spent it on. Held that $5. And she was nice. I remember when I was, I guess it was 1979 to 1980. It was a decade. And I've always loved New Year's Eve. It's fantastic. I mean, I went to a couple of great parties when I was a kid. Like my mom would go, I had some friends. Great parties. So I always loved New Year's Eve, and especially the decade New Year's. It's a big deal, right? And I remember my mom had gone out somewhere, and I was over at my friend Bob's house. He lived in a townhouse. And he and his mom weren't really into New Year's. They just went to bed. And I remember sitting with a radio, a little portable radio, listening to people having fun thousands of miles away as I struggled to stay awake in the darkness and sadness of an empty New Year's. But I had a place to go. And I remember also there were these girls who were gymnasts at a party at Bob's house. And I guess I was 13 or 14. And I wanted to impress them. And so I wanted to show them how I could do a handstand against a wall. I slipped and put my head through the wall. Don't you just hate saying to people, I put a hole in your wall? Terrible. Anyway, so what happened was things came to a head. So as I was very shy when I was a kid, more shy. I was shy when I was a kid. And I sort of grew out of that. And it was, some of it was willed and some of it was just, you know, the bubbles of personality rising in adulthood. But here's what happened. So we were biking. And I remember cops came by. We were playing Frisbee in the mall parking lot. Cops came by. What are you doing? Not going home, pretty much. But so we were biking back from Edwards Gardens. I think we were biking the night at Edwards Gardens. We were biking back. And, you know, when you had a bike, you didn't need a car. I mean, you could get anywhere if you were willing to keep biking. So we were biking back, and I was biking ahead of Bob. And there was a rock on the sidewalk. So I swerved to avoid it, and he nearly ran into me. And again, I knew he had a bad temper, and often I would just kind of, okay, right, be conciliatory and so on. But for some reason, I don't know why. It could just be getting older. I just was done with that. And kind of have been ever since. But that one moment, I remember very clearly. And Bob got really angry, and he said, You cut me off, man. And I said, No, you were tailgating. Tough call, right? Tough call. I mean, you know, I know in a car, if you're behind, you bump in, so it's your fault and all, but was he tailgating or did I cut him off? If I cut him off, it was kind of my fault. I just randomly biked in front of him for no reason, right? But if he was tailgating, then the fault is his. Whose fault was the near collision? And it's a funny thing because it mattered at the time. And actually it did matter. Like at the time, say, well, you know, it's just a near collision. What does it matter? Your friendship and blah, blah, blah. But it kind of did matter. It kind of did matter because it came down to he was tailgating. Listen, if you have to swerve to avoid something on the road or on the sidewalk and someone almost crashes into you, sorry, it's their fault. It's their fault. You know, if I'm on the road, sounds like I'm adjudicating something decades later, but it's important because these principles matter. They can be life-defining moments, which way your life goes, one way or the other. You know, if I'm driving up north and someone, like I'm so close to behind someone that they have to stop because there's a deer on the road and I go crashing, it's my fault. You cut me off. No, you were tailgating. You know, stay 2 cars distance, right? So we had this conflict. Did I cut him off or was he tailgating? And I knew, of course, that if I appeased him, then things would be okay. But they wouldn't, right? You understand. I would win or things would calm down in the moment, but I would lose something important. Not just with him, but in my life. It's a principle. And I didn't abstract it but it was happening. Testosterone spigot was on, baby. But no, I mean, you understand it was important. I couldn't just say, well, I'm sorry that I didn't crash into a rock on the sidewalk and, you were tailgating. You were too close to me. And I didn't back down. And he went nuts. People say that. No, he really went nuts. Like it was like a horror movie. Like he started yelling and screaming. And I've always been freaked out by that because it's like, hey, don't you know that there are people around? Well, it was really late at night. It's like, so there wasn't really anyone around. And we went through the mall parking lot and went to the apartment building. And he was like screaming at me. And I was like, he would bike downstairs. I wouldn't, I like the capacity to reproduce. Anyway, so he was kind of barreling after me. And I, crossed the road, and there weren't many cars on the road, thankfully. And he's screaming at me, and he's biking after me, and I'm like going down the stairs, and I'm fumbling into my pocket trying to get out my key to the door to get in, because it was one of the apartment buildings. Like, you get in, you close the door, it locks, right? And somebody can wait, I guess, for someone else to come in and slip in with them. But it was in the side door, and I'm like, he's coming down the stairs on his bike, and I'm getting the key in and throwing my bike in and diving in and closing my doors as he's coming up, and right? I mean, Lorda. It was really intense. And, heart pounding. But I was still glad I did it. Like, no, you were tailgating. Sorry, Bob, you were tailgating. And I go up to my apartment, and nobody else was there. And I was on like the 5th floor. We moved a couple of times in that building, but I think that time we were at the 5th floor, 4th floor or 5th floor. Door closed, balcony door closed. I can hear him screaming. And I kind of peek over the balcony, and he's throwing his bike around and just like, holy God. Nuts. Could not accept that he was tailgating. And now, of course, after that, there was no more friendship. What can you say? You can't. He did, I think like a couple of months later, 6 months later, he called me up and said, hey, man, you have a football of mine. I want it back. And, I can't remember what happened, but I'll get it back to you at some point. I'll bring it to school, whatever, right? Now, of course, I was, there were over 1,000 kids in my school, so I could. And I graduated to different friends, and I think better friends, obviously. They got into my Dungeons and Dragons crowd, and everyone went to college, became a professional. And, it was a step up, but it was, because it sort of indicated to me that, like that, I don't know whether to call it self-indulgence or not, because he was, 14 or whatever, right? But just having the capacity to blow up to that degree and then not say, Mom, I need help, or I just blew up a friendship of years, or apologize, or, just, right? Oh, man, it's bad. It's bad. If you've had people in your life where if you stand up for something you think is true and they just continue to escalate and like no end in sight, and it's like, yikes, it is not good. And you can buy a temporary peace with appeasement, but you lose yourself. You lose pretty much everything over time. And so I'll tell you the end of the story, and there is an end, sadly, to the story. But thinking about how much of me or how much of you is not under our control, authority, responsibility, or part of our virtue is pretty important, right? So there's this rule, it's general, like 16% of kids have genes that are troublesome, 16% of kids have genes that are strong, so to speak, and there's a bunch of kids in the middle that can go either way depending on environment. Now, maybe Bob had the genes that just was this way inclined, plus the bad environment, it doesn't help. And maybe I just had these genes that made me kind of indestructible regardless of environment. Right? If I think, philosophy will save you from this. Well, philosophy can't save you from genetics. It can help. I think it can help, but it can't save you from genetics. Philosophy can't turn you from one organism into another. I guess leftist pseudo-philosophy can change you from one gender to another, but you can't go from the outie to the innie based on philosophy. And so I think, well, I got philosophy and then I was saved, but maybe I was saved to some degree by genetics and philosophy was part of that. I don't know. But how much tragedy there is wrapped up in genetics, in that which is beyond people's control. Don't get me wrong. I still think that its philosophy is valid. And, there's still a huge chunk of kids in the middle, of people in the middle, of souls in the middle that can go either way if they get the right information. Some people will die young, even if they diet and exercise. And I've known some. And some people will live to a ripe old age, even if they drink and smoke. But there's a lot of people in the middle who can go either way. But I've been going back in time and thinking about those I knew who may have had no chance. Another friend of mine was a sweet, gentle kid. We used to talk. Conversation. It's rare finding kids who can have conversations, can talk. And his parents went to get him one morning and he was just dead. Had a heart defect. Nobody knew about it. He just died in his sleep. But he was my first peer great conversationalist. We used to walk around in these random patterns in the recesses in school, just talking. He was a great kid. He had one set of genes, and my friend Bob had another. Maybe he could be helped. Maybe he could be saved. Maybe he couldn't. Say, you see, it's a single mom, single son environment that's so destructive. But maybe it's because those are the same genetics that lead her to become a single mom are the same genetics that make him aggressive. I don't know. But because I am so invested and wedded to the idea of choice, coming up against limitations to that choice is very hard. It's heartbreaking. For me, maybe it's relief for you, I don't know. But it's humbling. Because let me tell you what happened. So what happened was, years after we were friends, but not many, my friend Bob was on a motorbike. And the car ahead of him stopped. And he didn't. And he went flying through the air. Landed in a horrible way. His helmet apparently had come off in the accident, or maybe it was loose, or maybe he wasn't wearing it. I don't know. But he died. He died. He was tailgating, you understand? He was tailgating. And you see the conflicts that you don't listen to can potentially be your undoing. If he had accepted, I don't know, this is pure theory, but if he had accepted my argument that he was tailgating, and if he'd learned to keep more of a respectful distance when he was biking or motorbiking, if he listened, but our friendship died because he was tailgating, and then he died, I think, because he was tailgating. Did he have a choice? Could he have surmounted his fight-or-flight storm and come to reason? I was able to, for which I took some pride, and for which I still take some pride. I had a choice. Did Bob have a choice? Let me know what you think in the comments below. I'm really curious. Thank you. Thank you for listening. I appreciate that, and rest in peace, Bob.
Well, let's catch up on a few stories from the last week. We'll start with Alexandra Ocasio-Cortez, the Socialist Democrat candidate for Congress from the Bronx. She says that the reason unemployment figures are low is because everybody has two jobs. The facts: there are about 148 million people in this country with jobs. Only 6 million of them have two. Elizabeth Warren, Pocahontas, she's doubled down on that number. She says 4 jobs. You've probably heard that some conventions are canceling in San Francisco because they don't want their conventioneers to have to wade through human poop on the sidewalks. So what is the new mayor of San Francisco, London Breed, a.k.a. Who Flung Dung, going to do about that? She's going to ask the agencies that work with the homeless to ask their clients to please behave. Make it illegal to poop on the streets? Well, no, because that would be criminalizing homelessness. More feces news from California, Boyle Heights, near Los Angeles. There's a new coffee shop opening. It's kosher, but the neighbors found out that the owners support Donald Trump. So they gathered outside of the coffee shop and they threw, yes, feces at the coffee shop. They want it shut down. So now we have 2 types of animals that fling poo. That would be liberals and monkeys. The citizens of New Jersey, already the most overtaxed people in the country, have a new tax they may have to face now. There's going to be a tax on tap water. The officials are just calling it a user fee. So it goes. Solomon Brothers Studios in Naples. This is Neal Boortz.
Radio. It's nothing new. It's been here all along with free entertainment, news, sports, music, and information. It's not just part of life. It's part of who we are. You know which station is going to tell you the score of the game, which one's going to give you a laugh in the morning, which one is going to give you something to sing along with. You know where to turn when the weather gets rough. When something big happens, good or bad, you know where to go because radio has been here all along. Radio is part of your community, woven into the fabric of what makes home, home. And now, radio has evolved to move with you with the Next Radio app and your FM-enabled phone. Just plug in your headphones to start experiencing radio in a whole new way while using way less battery and data than streaming apps. Check out the live guide to see and interact with live radio stations. Easily find your favorites like the one you're listening to right now. And as always, it's totally free. Download the Next Radio app today. Next Radio, live and local wherever you go.
They were outnumbered, out-equipped. They had no chance of winning, but they had one huge advantage: General George Washington.
The fate of unborn millions will now depend, under God, on the courage and conduct of this army. We have to resolve to conquer or die.
Just as the leadership of one man helped form a nation, today leadership can transform the world. Leadership is in you. Now pass it on from passiton.com.
This is the Reason Podcast, and I'm your host, Nick Gillespie. Please subscribe to us at iTunes, at Google Play Music, at Reason.com, your favorite RSS feed, or wherever you get your podcast on. And when you do that, please rate and review us wherever you're listening. Today, we are talking with 2 Reason staffers. One is Mike Riggs, and the other is Robbie Suave, who have different points of view over a recent controversy dealing with Facebook. In a podcast with Recode, Mark Zuckerberg, the founder and head of Facebook, defended having various sorts of kind of semi-insane hate speech on his website, including things like, or on his service, including things like InfoWars, the Alex Jones conspiracist site, which has a tenuous grasp on reality, as well as Holocaust deniers. At one point, Mark Zuckerberg was asked, why do you have Holocaust deniers on your site? And he answered, what we will do is we'll say, okay, you have your page, and if you're not trying to organize harm against someone, or if you're not attacking someone, then you can put content on that page, even if people might disagree with it or find it offensive. And Zuckerberg also added, but that doesn't mean we have a responsibility to make it widely distributed in our news feed. Now, of course, over the past few months, Facebook has come in for some real bruising, both from Republicans and Democrats, either for supposedly throttling down the reach of pages for people like Diamond and Steel, a pro-Trump duo of sisters who are black and love Trump and say they're not getting distributed evenly or equally on Facebook. And then on the flip side, you had Democrats saying that essentially that Facebook threw the election to Donald Trump by allowing fake news and web ads that were coming out of Russian troll farms to somehow dictate the outcome of 2016. Robbie Suave, we'll start with you. You have defended, in a piece at Reason.com, you have defended Mark Zuckerberg in a piece relevantly titled, "In Defense of Mark Zuckerberg Letting Holocaust Deniers Use Facebook." And the subtitle of that is, "Silencing Hate Isn't the Same Thing as Squelching It." What's your case for why Facebook should let anybody who wants to, as long as they're not inciting direct and immediate harm, a true threat, why they should be posting?
Right. So the big thing is that Zuckerberg, Facebook, is following essentially what is kind of the First Amendment approach to free speech, to having a platform. Now, obviously, they don't have to because they're a private company, so they could set different rules, whatever rules they want. However, they are sort of like a public square in that they're a massive platform that so many millions and billions of people around the world are involved in. Right. So I think some of the same arguments for why the First Amendment is a good approach applies to Facebook, even if I absolutely resist the idea that they should be forced to follow it, which is that it's easier to police the speech that is clearly over the line, that is, advocating direct violence or imminent lawless action. That's what the Supreme Court has said is not protected by the First Amendment. But then when you get into just what's hate speech. So the court has never recognized a definition for hate speech, has always wisely pointed out, that what might be hateful to one group of people is true for another. And Facebook is so massive. If it was trying to apply a standard of abolishing fake news or hateful speech, I think it would very quickly run into problems because of subjectivity and bias. You would see, it's easy, right, to say that Alex Jones shouldn't be there, InfoWars shouldn't be on there, but there are, millions of people who would think a Planned Parenthood page or a Black Lives Matter page, right? This is hate speech against the police. This is something some conservatives do believe. And the kind of people making these calls at Facebook, obviously, by and large, will not share the conservative worldview. They'll be sort of woke liberals, and it will lead to more conservatives feeling persecuted against, and then paradoxically, I think, greater calls to regulate to Facebook and like a public utility that everyone has the right to say even hateful things on, which is what it would be if it was public.
Wait, but if it's a public utility, all it would do is accomplish exactly what's going on now, right? Because if it's public space, we would have to say, okay, and it's not like a television network where there's scarce space. It's just you got to let everything go.
Right. If it was nationalized in some sense, it would have to follow basically the policy it's following now, which to my mind is another reason not to bother nationalizing it.
So that's
the
kind of a paradox, isn't it? That like if the government forced it to act as a utility, it would be doing exactly what it's doing now. So maybe the First Amendment is overblown. It's not necessary.
I don't think that's an argument against doing that. I think the argument against doing that is different, is because the government shouldn't have the power to do that, and that would be different arguments.
And just to be clear, we all agree, I'm sure, and Mike, I'm going to turn to you in a second, but we all agree that if you write something like on Facebook, I want everybody in the neighborhood of Mike Riggs, who lives now in Philadelphia. And I won't name the exact address, but it's around where Pat's and Geno's are. It's a very interesting intersection, both, just kind of geographically, because there's like a bunch of different roads that come together there. It's almost like a Five Corners type situation, but it's also the epicenter of the cheesesteak universe. It's if it's a Rick and Morty episode about cheesesteaks, this is where they're going to be appearing. But if somebody on Facebook said, hey, you know what, like Mike Riggs lives here, would you go and kill him for me? I'm going to be heading over there, but if I get there too late, take him out. That, a threat is something that should be purged from Facebook, as well as libel and defamation, as is legally understood. These are not protected by the First Amendment.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Okay, so Mike, what's your beef with the idea that Zuckerberg? I mean, because we saw him talk, and I think all of us wrote something about it at least. We saw Zuckerberg, talking in front of the House and the Senate, saying, "Hey, you know what? I'm ready to get regulated. I am, we got to take down stupid stuff. We got to we got to tighten up our ship, make sure that people aren't giving away data that they don't even understand." But what's wrong with Robbie's very libertarian argument that let everybody post, and the reader, caveat lector, let the reader beware, and they figure it out.
So I think there's two separate ways to think about this, and they can exist side by side. And one of them, which Robbie kind of addresses, is what should the government be able to ask of Facebook? Like, what should it be able to tell Facebook it can and can't, or must not do? And my feelings on that are kind of straight, easy libertarian, which is that nothing. Facebook is a private company. It's not a public utility. It's not a arm of the government, even though it sometimes acts like one.
And it's not on a scarce resource. So this isn't. I mean, the reason why broadcast networks, whether radio or TV, can be regulated is because technically, and this is all horseshit, but they're actually on public spectrum space that's allocated to them. They don't actually own it. This is a scarce resource. So the reason why the government can say to ABC, CBS, NBC, you have to give equal time, or you're not allowed to use certain types of curse words without incurring the wrath of the federal government, it's because of scarcity. But they can't say that to newspapers, and they can't say that to websites for the most part.
Right. And, the fact that there's no scarcity on the web, it kind of explains why Facebook is so bad at finding needles in the haystack, which is what I think it honestly comes out to. I think that some of the worst actors on Facebook have a bigger reach than you would think based on how few of them there are. I'm just not convinced that there's, I would be shocked if there's more than a dozen Holocaust denial pages on Facebook, which is saying something considering that there's, billions of users, which is why I support.
So wait, are you questioning the numbers of Holocaust denial pages? You're saying that the numbers are off, or that they're exaggerated? It sounds like you're participating in Holocaust denial.
Yeah, no, I'm sure there's a lot of them. There's dozens as opposed to just a dozen. I just think that the reach is more the issue than the actual number, which is why I'm totally opposed as a user, as a customer of Facebook, not as this has nothing to do with regulation, which is where I disagree with Robbie, is that I don't think Facebook is under any obligation to host a public square. Facebook is not the internet. And if it wants to be, a thing that keeps its high earning users, it should be far more discriminatory than it is. It doesn't owe any one page or ideology or viewpoint or theory a space. And I think Facebook has become a crappier product as Zuckerberg has pushed it to be more and more inclusive. I understand that's what allowed them to scale up. But
what do you mean by more and more inclusive? I mean, because they're not we need viewpoint diversity. So, what we're really missing are a couple of Holocaust denial pages. That'll really round out the range of perspectives that are available to a Facebook user.
Yeah, I guess in terms of inclusive, I just mean not exclusive. I don't know if those are the same things, but this idea that Facebook should be for everyone, so long as they don't, incite violence or harass people, I think it's silly. It's a private product. It's like saying that Amazon.com should sell guns because guns are illegal. Well, if Amazon doesn't want to sell guns, or Amazon's investors don't want Amazon selling guns, there's nothing wrong with Facebook saying, you know what, we're not really going to bother to parse whether or not this Holocaust denial page is agitating for violence towards Jews, or whether or not they just support like the Iranian government. Like, just shut it down. Who gives a shit? Shut the page down.
Would it be fair to say, Mike, that what you're arguing is that, and this is something that I want to come back to Robbie about, who writes a lot about this, that essentially Facebook is like a private university where it really is not bound by the First Amendment, and that it would be a better environment for learning or for the people on the campus. Let's think of the Facebook platform as a campus where they didn't have to put up with all sorts of batshit crazy people screaming and yelling. I don't know, if your guys' colleges were like this, but I went to a public school or a state-supported school. It got very little funding from the state, but be that as it may, it was a First Amendment zone. And, a couple of times a year, whenever you were going to the main dining hall on the College Avenue campus of Rutgers, a bunch of evangelicals had set up shop, and they would be using bullhorns to talk about how everybody was going to hell. And, for God's sake, don't get the cheese sauce. That's like Satan's favorite or something. You're saying that Facebook is like a private university and it would be, and they should be able to just kick out anybody who they think is going to be a troublemaker or degrade the experience of their main customers.
Yeah, totally. And I know that sounds like sort of crazy when you think about how Facebook is run now, but, it doesn't have like clear fiefdoms or regional management in the way that a site like maybe Reddit does, where, there are subreddits dedicated to specific conversations, and then all of the subreddits have moderators. And if a moderator feels like someone is trying to introduce a topic or a post in a subreddit where it doesn't belong, they can delete it or kick the person out. And I recognize that, like, my vision for making Facebook a better product, again, this is not to say that I'm not calling for regulations here. I think this should all be voluntary on Facebook's part. My vision for them is a sort of more decentralized platform in which users can assume a role that is like sort of above complaining and below Zuckerberg, like in between. Right? Like in between Mark Zuckerberg saying like, this is what Facebook is because I say that's what Facebook is. And then the person who's like, every time I log on here, I'm either inundated with like batshit crazy nonsense by people who would be really thrilled if like Americans started killing each other, or just pictures of babies. Right? Like we can't even like curate our experiences on Facebook because like the software that informs what we see is totally opaque to the user. I guess but you
can curate it pretty well, right? Because like if you see something in your feed you don't like, you get rid of it, and then the AI takes over. So let me go to Robbie for a second. Robbie, let's dilate a little bit on this private university versus public university. You went to Michigan, which, if memory serves, is one of the worst schools in the country, mostly because it is part of Michigan. And they can't win a football game really to save their lives. We know that, and they choke most of the time in basketball, and those are the only things that really matter at college.
This was the whole point of having this
pretty much, pretty much. It is to and that it's like what are the colors are technically like maize and blue or something. Like it's not even just yellow and blue. It's they've got to try and
this is hate speech, and this shouldn't be allowed.
But this is Reasons Podcast, and we can do whatever we want. No, but what is it a better university experience if you like if you have the ability, because you're a private university, to say, like all of these fucktards that come onto campus, like, no, Milo is not an intellectual speaker. Snooki is not an intellectual speaker. Like, no, we're just not going to have them. We're going to shut down their speech. Why isn't that a good idea?
Well, first, I want to. So the private university, I feel more strongly that private universities, many of them, not all of them, but many of them should not be able to exclude people. I feel more strongly about that than Facebook, because private universities, many of them, not all of them, make contractual obligation. I mean, you're giving them a lot of money and they're promising you certain things. And sometimes in the written sort of codes of conduct, in the agreement they make with you, they're saying you're going to have free speech rights and some other rights as well. And if they're not giving you those, then it's not a legal, the First Amendment issue. It's a contractual arrangement. thing, you're giving them a bunch of money. So that's my feeling on private. So that's not the relationship you have with Facebook, right? You're not paying to use it. So those are different in that way to me.
Okay.
You know what? Okay, but right, Snooki doesn't have a lot of value to provide, I guess, maybe.
By the way,
but I would rather listen to her than not.
Snooki. Yeah, no, and I do just want to point out that Snooki, or what I forget. All I know is she's not really from New Jersey, but she did get to speak at Rutgers in the same year that
the show, Jersey Shore has an interesting narrative logic to it from a production standpoint that is worth study, in my opinion.
Oh, I agree. I agree. Yeah, no, but I'm saying so that what's her name? The Secretary of State under George Bush, who I'm blanking on right now. Condi Rice was disinvited from Rutgers the same year that Snooki was paid more money to actually show up. And there's something kind of fucked up about that. I mean, before we get into anything else, where you have a serious person who was a politician and had an effect on world events, and then you have Condoleezza Rice. But
let me say, so I had this experience at Michigan. I was covering an activism conference, and they had Bill Ayers there, the Weather Underground guy. Sure. Is considered a domestic terrorist. I think he was pardoned and all of that. He's served his time. He should not have to. And this is where it gets complicated, right? Being a libertarian, where Bill Ayers should, he's a horrible human being. He blew up a lot of stuff. He was part of a really idiotic group, the Weather Underground, but he did his time, and he shouldn't have to check a box if he's a felon, right? Right. No, I agree with that. What I was going to say is that it was
quickly, but yes,
it was a rewarding experience for me as a student journalist, starting a career in journalism, to be able to interview this controversial, well-known. This was the first sort of notable public person I got to interview writing for the student newspaper, and that was a rewarding experience for me. Now, Ayers' views and past actual activities would easily be categorized as hateful and even unsafe under a not even a very sort of extreme kind of fainting heart. Oh my gosh, everything is bad. It's not even maybe the 10 out of 10 case of that, right? It's a little less extreme, but this was a rewarding experience for me that a lot of people would deny me under the nope, hate speech, no good sort of standard.
And I just want to point out that Bill Ayers, who may or may not have been absolute best friends with Barack Obama, and these are the kinds of right-wing crazy conspiracies that float all over the place on Facebook. But on September 10th, 2001, the New York Times had a story about his memoir, which had just been released, and in the New York Times interview, he said, you know what, looking back, the only regret I have is that we should have bombed more buildings, thereby earning himself, just the absolute worst timing award for all history of releasing a memoir. But so you're saying, I mean, and again, this is all kind of, what we're talking about here is not necessarily First Amendment rights or the idea that the government should or should not be regulating something. But, Robbie, you're making the maximalist case for, let everybody, whether it's at a university or on Facebook, let everybody spew whatever the fuck they want, because in the end, that's a richer conversation and social tapestry.
Right, and also a practical case that a platform as massive as Facebook, many thousands, or I can't really do math, so maybe it's millions or thousands of times larger than the University of Michigan. Practically, their effort to reduce hate will run into trouble. I mean, countries that try to police hate speech, like in Europe, end up jailing people for sharing videos of their dog doing a Nazi salute. The video is actually hilarious, in my opinion, because it commits to the gag for 10 straight minutes, and it starts out not funny, but then in this sort of almost Rick and Morty humor to go back to it. It's so funny.
The infamous case of Count Dankula.
Right.
Training his dog, but actually, ironically, it wasn't Count Dankula who got in trouble, right? It was the guy who showed the video at a comedy club.
No, I think Count Dankula himself got in
and
trouble.
I really just want us to, say Count Dankula.
Use the word Count Dankula.
As often as possible. Because is there going to be like Dankenberry? Is he going to come out? And then what happens to who is the alt-right version of Fruit Brute? As long as we're talking about all the monster cereals, Mike, you seem like you're getting kind of steamed at all this, and maybe you're living in South Philadelphia now. And, you can't be in South Philly for more than about 5 minutes without feeling rage coursing through your veins.
I just don't know where we got the idea that anyone should be allowed to say anything anywhere. Like this is, I just don't see it. Like, I think private settings are the perfect place to exclude people. And you can, for whatever reason you want, right? Like the local churches around here are not obligated to let me take to the pulpit. I can't just walk into a restaurant and begin pronouncing, about who really committed 9/11. Mm-hmm. Like there are just lots of places where we say, no, you're not welcome here. You're not welcome here because this is not the right kind of environment for proselytizing.
It's just like fuck you. It's my restaurant. Get the fuck out. Yeah, right. That's a big libertarian value. Even when it, as far as I'm concerned, like with the cake bakers and stuff, like. I don't think anybody should be, anybody should be forced to, bake the proverbial gay Nazi wedding cake. But by the same token, anybody who wouldn't do that strikes me as kind of an idiot. But Robbie, what do you say to that? Because, this does seem to, and again, we're not, nobody here is talking about like what we really need is the government to take over Facebook so that, their algorithm will benefit Reason and Diamond and Steel and, every other group that is, everybody's annoyed that they don't get enough reach on Facebook stuff. But, why shouldn't Facebook, at what level of scale should people be allowed to say, no, get out of my face with your speech. This is my house. This is my restaurant. This is my website. This is my service.
Well, that is an apt metaphor. I mean, right. So the restaurant owner gets to obviously set the speech rules in his restaurant, or should be allowed to. He should be able to exclude or not exclude people.
And what you want, or I guess maybe you want it to be able to, not no shoes, no shirt, no service, no Jews, no shirt, no service.
I'm saying Mark Zuckerberg is the proprietor of a restaurant that is like the entire world, and he's saying, look, we're not going to consciously exclude anyone unless they're literally planning violence. And you know what? If you don't like that, you can curate your experience somewhat. You can block people.
Take it to Gab, right? Get the fuck off here. There's other media platforms.
You can do that. I think it would be better if they work toward offering you a more customized. Like, I don't disagree with Riggs' vision somewhat in having a more customizable experience, and if they could work on improving that. But it's just not so unreasonable to me, given the size of Mark Zuckerberg's restaurant, to say, you know what, we're going our standards of who gets kicked off for speech are going to be
Here's
pretty
a question. What do you
high.
What do Holocaust deniers, do you think, do they eat bagels ever? Or are they like, no? What do they have for breakfast, as long as we're talking about restaurants?
You'd have to ask them on Facebook, right? How else could you contact them?
Well, Robbie, is there anywhere, and you have emerged over the past couple of years at Reason as an unbelievably I'm trying to think of the right word, axiomatic defender of stupid, ugly hate speech, no matter where it happens. Like at any time, an employer, like, a school, like in where Riggs is living now in Philadelphia, across the Schuylkill River in Drexel, there was a professor who said a bunch of ugly, horrible things.
George Sakariel Omar, yes.
Yeah, and you defended his right on Twitter to say hateful, stupid things. You've defended I don't know if you've ever, is there anything anywhere somebody might say on social media that should have them stricken either from that platform or from their job?
I think the First Amendment standards is good. I think if you engage in swatting, if you're calling the cops on someone, I I think you should go to jail for that. That should be a felony. If you're planning violence, if you're doing the things that the court has very reasonably said, no, this is over the line. And are there hard cases? Yes, but actually the rules for the public domain are pretty good and pretty internally consistent. There are some blurry ones. There are sometimes they've gone too far. I mean, kids in primary public school, the bong hits for Jesus type stuff, I actually think their speech rights are a little too infringed upon. But by and large, the rules are good.
Mike, what do you think about that? And explain, is getting rid of people... you were talking about the Facebook experience as being kind of dreary and awful, partly because you can't really control what's getting piped through your feed. And that might have as much to do with advertising as it has to do with anything else. But at what point does a place like Reddit become uninteresting, partly because it becomes totally balkanized, where you have that customizable experience, but then you never see anything that you disagree with or that challenges you? Or at a place like Reddit, they've also, they've gotten rid of they've shut down whole subreddits, so that it's, it isn't the logic once you start kind of censoring certain stuff or kicking out certain thoughts and certain ideas, it never stops there. It always ends with, kicking out everybody who offends whoever happens to, hold the dial or whatever, the censorship button is.
Yeah, no, I think that's totally true. Like Reddit has continues to ban groups. They've done some stuff I don't like with shutting down either subreddits or pages where people talk about using drugs. YouTube has done the same thing. Facebook has definitely done the same thing. I don't like that. Like, I want to be able to read that stuff on those pages, but I also think on net, the compromises that Reddit has made have improved the platform significantly. And one of the things that I think Reddit had a hard time doing, and that journalists have had a hard time doing, and I'm sure that Zuckerberg is having a hard time doing, is really figuring out when speech crosses the line. Does a subreddit, for instance, or a private Facebook group that is dedicated to upskirt photos, if you can't verify whose skirt it is, maybe these things are staged. Maybe it's a spouse or a significant other who's in on the fetish. And people have is that protected speech? People have a really hard time figuring this stuff out. And the nice thing about being a private company is you don't have to figure it out. Just ban the whole page, ban the whole group, ban the whole subreddit. And if there's a place that sees monetization potential and catering to that audience, then that sounds like a perfect match for that person and those advertisers and that group of fetishists or whatever. But we keep talking, there's two things that we're talking about that are kind of in conflict with each other. One of them is that the internet has infinite bandwidth, and the other is that Facebook has so many users that it is essentially the internet. So I'm not exactly sure those things are mutually exclusive, because Facebook could just be fashioned in such a way that even though the internet is infinite, the internet is most easily navigable through Facebook, which is what people have said about Google for a long time. Google is not the internet, but it's easiest to get around the internet using Google. And I think that if we continue talking about Facebook as if it is the internet, as if it is a public space, that it will end up being nationalized or heavily regulated. And the crazy thing is people on the left and right both see what Robbie is saying as a justification for either requiring Facebook to comply with First Amendment standards for speech, or if you're on the left, splitting it up, right? Because it's this weird monopoly on the social internet, and it is overall a toxic force because it enables political trickery or hate speech or weird lynch mobs or, intellectual property theft. I actually haven't heard any leftists make that argument, but Facebook does that too. And so I see from a consumer perspective and a Facebook as a product perspective that one of the ways to address all of this is to make it exclusive, right? If it's not banning people, offer me a paid option so that I don't ever have to see any of that, even by accident. At some point during the election, one of my family members, I have a lot of family from the South, shared an article that said that claimed Hillary Clinton was going to in her first 100 days, she was going to ban deer hunting across the United States. And it was like infuriating how dumb that was. Like it wasn't true. There was nothing anywhere else in the internet to prove it's true. Hillary Clinton, like most other Democrats, like talks about hunting as one of the only legitimate uses of privately owned firearms. And yet, like, I'm just watching like this conversation unfold. I'm like seeing it spread the way memes do, where like these other people who lived in this rural community are reading this and being like, this is outrageous. This is why we need Trump. And I'm just like, if Facebook wants to keep that stuff on there, which as a Facebook customer, I don't want them to. I want that off the platform. I think it's garbage. I think it's like the intellectual equivalent of selling spoiled food at the grocery store, which I would rage about that as well if my local grocery store intentionally sold spoiled food.
There's some real delicacies that are spoiled, like lutefisk
and all cheeses, right? And I get that. I get that. And I think that there are some like really marginal ideas that are themselves like sort of intellectual delicacies. Many of the things that libertarians have advocated for decades were, these kinds of intellectual delicacies. And if Facebook had been around 4 decades ago and saw libertarians as like so marginalized that they should be excluded from the platform, like maybe our ideas would not have germinated into what they've turned into now. When I look at the social internet, though, I don't see any seedlings, intellectual seedlings, philosophical seedlings that are at risk of being banned that are going to be something good if allowed to germinate. Like, for instance, like maybe I'm wrong. Maybe like if you just keep adding topics to the list or groups or interests or fetishes or ideologies, that eventually we will reach a kind of gray area. But it seems easy to me to start with things like Holocaust denialism and neo-Nazism and sort of blatant ethno-nationalism or ethnic supremacy. Like that stuff seems pretty easy to me. And you could you could take a lot of wind out of the sails of some really awful people by just being just dropping the ban hammer left and right. And then maybe they migrate elsewhere, and all these people who are posing more complicated questions to you, maybe they follow, maybe they straighten up. Like, I just don't see what the good is of leaving it as is.
Well, Robbie, I have 2 questions for you that are related to this. Like in the way Mike is talking, when Milo Yiannopoulos got booted from Twitter, and I assume he's booted from Facebook, I don't even know, but like he lost his audience in a pretty big way, and it does seem that the squelching of the alt-right kind of megaphone since Charlottesville has had the effect of generally kind of reducing the influence of that group. Do you think? I mean, is that accurate, or are there problems there that we're not factoring into things?
I don't think the banning of these people is part of the reason for their waning influence. Milo, I don't think banning him from certain platforms, and I think he still has a fan page on Facebook. He is definitely banned on Twitter. He has an Instagram page. I mean, what stopped his spread? And
I'm assuming he's like the PewDiePie of Gab, if that's still around, the right wing alternative to Twitter, right? Peach, which whatever. Yeah,
he was revealed by good, solid reporting done by BuzzFeed. They published, internal emails he had sent to people. He was revealed as both more of an actual Nazi than people were aware. I mean, when he was saying Nazi things before, some people thought, oh, he's making a free speech argument or something, or he's doing. I mean, that is, I don't think, very defensible what he was doing anyway. But they didn't think he literally believed in the ideology of white supremacy.
They thought
and
he
then
was
based
being
on
a performance artist, but in fact, it's like no, emails, this is really what I believe.
Right, his emails revealed it went well beyond that into actually thinking it, and also that he was a fraud, that he was not responsible for any of his own output. It was being written by other people.
But that just makes him like Alexander Dumas, or in more current terms, James Patterson, right? James Patterson authors like 150 books a year, but it's not even clear he reads them. He certainly doesn't write them, right? So I kind of salute. I mean, Milo is like the blog equivalent of Andy Warhol, where you set up a factory, or Jeff Koons. These guys I kind of admire him for that. But I agree, it hurt his credibility because he's a bullshit
It hurt
artist.
his credibility. Well, it hurt his credibility. He was on the verge of getting some kind of mainstream acceptance, right? He had he had a book deal with a main publisher, and he was going to speak at CPAC. And both those things collapsed.
Although he got
in the midst of the revelation.
He got bounced from CPAC because he introduced a more complicated understanding of homosexual, the initiation of gay sex by older men and teenage boys. That was the bridge too far that got him canned from CPAC, I believe. Although,
yes.
I agree, it's also interesting.
I think the greater scrutiny of him and the sort of broader, more revealing of him as a hack dented his put a stop to his what was kind of a meteoric sudden rise.
So in fact, though, Mike, it was more exposure of Milo rather than less. And I think, the thing that really put the coffin or the nail in his coffin was when the book manuscript he submitted, which was ultimately rejected by Simon & Schuster, that was released with the editor's comments on it. And what it revealed ultimately was that Milo just was not interesting. I mean, he was a provocateur, but there was nothing there, which I think came through when you watched videos of his campus appearances. Like, he would say nasty things or, like really over the top things, but there was no substance.
The only interesting thing about those appearances, right, was the reaction, the attempt to shut him down or get him kicked out. I mean, he couldn't even get through a talk, and he had nothing interesting to say, which would have been revealed if he'd been allowed to talk.
I just don't, if being deplatformed by social media companies did not lead to Milo's fall, then it seems to me the stakes of booting people are actually pretty low, right? Like, if it had nothing to do with, if Milo was on his way down, regardless of whether or not he's still on Facebook and Twitter, then it doesn't matter that you deplatformed. I actually think it did matter. I think that he lost a really good way to connect to a lot of people who are into his shtick, which is why I actually think.
And you don't worry though. You don't worry
off.
Though that when people like that get banned, and I mean, I guess this is something Robbie and I were kind of moving towards, if not saying explicitly. All you have to do, like, to diffuse the Milo bomb, you don't have to cut any wires. All you have to do is let him talk because he's uninteresting. But you're saying, no, it was really important. Once he got bounced off of Twitter, he disappears for like 99% of the population. You don't worry, though, Mike, that when you say to certain people, like, no, you are not welcome here. Your thoughts, your ideas, such as they are, cannot be expressed here, that doesn't create, it means Milo and a bunch of his gang are in a beer hall somewhere planning a putsch that is not going to come off the first time, but, maybe in 2030, they'll have created this whole secret movement because they were denied a fair hearing in polite society.
Maybe, I guess. I mean, you've still got like a very big internet for these people to congregate on, right? It's just not Facebook and Twitter. I mean, you still have 4chan, you still have Gab. I don't know what other sites are catering to the people who call themselves the alt-right, but they exist.
I would like to think that MySpace is almost completely inhabited now by neo-Nazis and Holocaust denialists, but I'm not sure.
And the band Modest Mouse.
Yeah, right. I actually went to MySpace today to listen to some old demo tracks I recorded with the band many years ago.
Or, they might be haunting the Space Jam website, which is still alive, but kind of untended. One of the great, you guys are too young to remember Usenet, I think, but Usenet was a series of bulletin boards before the web became a thing. And, people would go there and you could post, under all sorts of things. The first e-commerce purchase I made was on a Chris Elliott Usenet group where I was able to get a complete VHS set of his TV show Get a Life, as well as a very hard to find copy of his great fake memoir with his father called Daddy's Boy, which was like a satire of Mommy Dearest. But the Usenet group for Waffle House at one point where people would get together and talk about their Waffle House experiences. It was taken over by neo-Nazis. And so everybody left. And it was kind of like you could imagine a scene in a movie where like, a neo-Nazi motorcycle gang rolls into town and they just take over the Waffle House and they use it as their headquarters and everybody has to leave. And it's kind of sad, but what was good about it is you could just start your own Usenet group, and go, you could move on. You had a right of exit, even if you got squeezed out of a place that was properly your own. Robbie, if I can, and we'll end with this conversation because it's closely allied to this, and I'm curious what you think about it. We've talked a little bit about YouTube, and YouTube bans certain types of videos. And we recently, in our just fantastic issue that Catherine Mengu-Ward and Stephanie Slade put together, a burn after reading, where it was a bunch of semi-legal or gray area things were being discussed. We made a video about how to make a legal but untraceable gun in your kitchen. We could not post that video to YouTube because YouTube would take it down. We ended up having to post it to Pornhub, a porno site, which also does a bunch of gun stuff now that YouTube is against that. Related to all of this is that YouTube demonetizes certain videos or certain channels where they say, you can post the video and people can watch it, but you can't run ads against it. You can't make money off it. What is your sense of that? Is that a form of soft censorship, and do you get outraged about that, or is that a kind of acceptable, and it's not a limit on speech per se, but it is a kind of screwing around with freedom of expression on a platform, which just like Facebook, YouTube is the second largest search engine on the internet after Google. I mean, it is a gigantic public place. What are your thoughts about demonetization, and does that fit into a paradigm of censorship or censorious behavior that bothers you?
I kind of think it does, again, with the huge caveat that YouTube is a private company and they can do it whatever way they want to do it. That said, while I haven't looked at specific demonetization cases that closely, people that I kind of trust on these issues on Twitter have called out a couple examples, and none of them come to me at the moment, where it looked like it was not clear why a person was being demonetized, and it did seem a little suspect, like the rules were being enforced arbitrarily, which is often how it's going to seem, right? When the rules are kind of opaque and they're being enforced on this massive number of people. Can you have specific rules that can be followed that aren't totally just First Amendment broad type stuff? I mean, I think you can to some degree. I was going to bring this up earlier. You can have a term, like Twitter has terms of service, right, that you can't engage in directed, targeted harassment. And maybe, I don't know, in like a legal public context, there's kinds of harassment that is probably not, you wouldn't be jailed for it. Right. But Twitter is saying we would kick you off for it. That I think is doxing comes to mind. Sharing like where people live. Without their permission and actually that's what Milo did that, right? And I think he was actually kicked off Twitter for different reasons.
I mean, doxing. I mean, this is interesting because now we get into the question of so I look up Milo Yiannopoulos. I assume he lives in New York, and I go to an internet database, like a free public database, not even one you have to pay for, and you just look up his white page directory. Why should that be against the law?
I'm not saying it should be against the law,
but why should that be against terms of service?
There's a sort of privacy concern. Maybe this is a way in which I'm a little different in my free speech approach. Is that I also take privacy very seriously. And there are some in the internet age, in the digital age, in the social media age, there are some questions on privacy issues that I think we need to ask, and sort of posting where someone lives, to your millions of followers in like a very provocative, like, hey, we should all meet there. Maybe you're just implying that is a harassing and actually potentially dangerous thing to do. that is a pretty reasonable thing, I think, that should. And also, it's easier to enforce, right? Like if you literally say where the person lives, that's not very ambiguous. So that could be enforced and falls under a relatively straightforward and obvious understanding of harassing someone to me.
Okay. It's interesting stuff. And Mike, what is your sense about demonetization or about, these kind of sub actions that don't quite rise to the level of, okay, you're out of here, you're banned for life, or don't ever come around again, or take 6 months in the sin bin or something, What are your thoughts?
I don't know that I have necessarily a good answer. I mean, it's very difficult to take collective action without the assistance of legislators or the courts against any of the social media giants. And so, you can protest your local grocer or local businesses if they do something you find offensive, and maybe you have pretty good odds of that being successful. But us ranting and raving, I think legitimately so, against YouTube refusing to put up the gun video, obviously didn't really move the needle with YouTube. And if we believe that YouTube is so big that them excluding us for making a video that shows a fully legal process is an infringement on our rights, then, again, I guess the thing that I would like to see libertarians do now, which it seems like maybe we couldn't do this 10 years ago, but it's increasingly important that we sort of grapple with the size of the social media platforms and do we still believe that private actors get to do whatever they want, or have these things become so big and are they so intertwined with other parts of our lives and other parts of the economy that they should have to provide us with certain services? And
you say no, right, to that? They shouldn't even be subjected to the First Amendment. They're private companies.
Right. I definitely see how what I'm advocating could be turned against me to deprive me of my livelihood. I would be very interested in an alternate timeline to see how many media companies are still standing if Facebook shut down for a month. Right? If Facebook just stopped existing for a month, how many media companies go under? So I totally recognize the way that this could impact me directly. But if we're saying that the social media platform should accommodate all viewpoints, but we're also acknowledging that that these conversations that Zuckerberg is having are the result of pressure from the federal government and a potential criminal investigation into Russia's use of Facebook as a tool for interfering in the U.S. elections. That's why we're having these conversations. We weren't having these conversations in 2014, not at this level, even though Facebook probably had over 1 billion users in 2014. So that's kind of where I am right now. It's none of the conversations we're having now are the result of pressure from Facebook users, at the level of the individual or at the level of the publication, right? It's always been sort of coalitions.
Well, the other thing that I'll add to that is that Facebook is also, at least in North America, is seeing a decline in daily users for the first time. And North America is its most lucrative region, which is one of the reasons why I think you saw Mark Zuckerberg so happy to sit down and actually explicitly say, yeah, we're going to be regulated. I want to help you write the best regulations possible. And at one point he even said, and you do realize that all of the regulations that we write in tandem, and I'm happy to help you, will make it harder for the next Facebook to come up. This is the same thing. This is the great secret history of railroad regulation that was first really brought to the fore by the socialist historian Gabriel Kolko, who talked about how the progressive era story of regulating the railroads went something like this. Railroads were really big. They were taking advantage of all of their customers. So the government finally stepped in and said, you've had enough of an easy ride. We're going to regulate you to the benefit of all. Kolko actually pointed out, and he documents this pretty well, that the railroads were actually facing declining profits and they were facing more and more competition. So they went to the government and helped initiate regulation so they could say, you know what, we've got some real problems here, with the way things are going. We need to, in the name of the public interest, we need to regulate railroads and kind of lock in the current system, which is serving everyone so well. That's always in the background. Anytime a medium or a platform or any business is about to be regulated, there's 9 times out of 10, it's because they really want to be regulated because they realize they're starting to go south, which in some ways Facebook is, Google is, YouTube is, et cetera. Robbie, what do you think is the next big free speech kind of Mad Max or Hunger Games? I forget what is the name of the thing when the Hunger Games start, where all of the people are on the island, in the platform in the island, and they got to run. Where's that going to show up? I mean, we're seeing it in colleges, we're seeing it on social media. Do you have a sense of where it pops up next?
This is already happening, but it's going to be more of people losing their jobs for saying the wrong thing, James Damore type stuff. There's going to be more of that, and again, these are going to be these are conversations that will be more difficult because they're not as obvious as they are at public universities, where you have these very broad free speech rights.
Can I ask,
don't have
but
them.
Do James Damore, was ultimately fired. One assumes, who knows what the actual reason was, for writing an internal memo that was shared on a platform internally to Google that supposedly, depending on who you read, he was encouraged to do that or he did everything right, and then they were just offended at the content. But about being fired for things that you say on social media, we're all journalists, so being on social media is kind of part of our job and our persona. But, should a bus driver say, whether it's a private company or a public company, should a bus driver who, tweets somewhere, it's not, not enough Jews weren't killed in the so-called Holocaust, which never happened, but I really wish it did. Should people be subject to reprisal for public or private speech, or rather not private speech, but speech acts that were just inconceivable, 50 years ago. It was, nobody was putting out newsletters, like coming home from a day job and then putting out newsletters saying objectionable things.
Right. I tend to then always think, after the person gets fired for having in some job totally unconnected to the bad thing they said, I'm always like, okay, so what is the job then they can do? Mm-hmm. Where, right? Do you think they should just be homeless and in poverty because they think a bad thing or they said a bad thing? That doesn't even seem particularly progressive to me, let alone libertarian.
But by the same token, let's say you're the, you run Masterpiece cake shops or whatever in Colorado, and your boss is like, hey, I'm not going to bake the cake for the gays. As a matter of fact, I started out saying I'm going to bake the cake, but I won't put anything on it. And then it's like, no, fuck it. I'm not going to bake it at all because these guys are going to hell, and it would be an infringement on my religious rights. What if there's a baker, maybe the person who sweeps up or, cuts out little cookie hearts, with extra dough or something? He's progressive, and he goes home and he says, my boss is a big fucking asshole, and he's a homophobe, and, I don't believe in hell, but I wished I did so that he would go there. Should the owner of that establishment be able to say, hey, you know what, get the fuck out?
Well, they should be able to. Mm-hmm. They should be able to. What we're having this sort of discussion about, is that better for those people and for society if every time you express something bad you get run out of society? And I tend to say no. I tend to say that discussion, even though it can be uncomfortable and it can be hard, can improve people's wrong think over time, can be cleared up. It's not always the case, but there are examples of this, right? There's that black musician Daryl Davis who collects KKK memorabilia from people who were once in the KKK but have renounced it after hanging out with the guy. there are other stories like that. So I don't. And you wouldn't engage in commerce with anyone if you could only engage in commerce with people who were perfect.
Okay.
There'd be no one. You'd be an island unto yourself.
Oh, and we know autarky is a bad deal. Mike Riggs, are you worried about the future, not so much of free speech, but of that larger mindset where, the right used to always say, the problem today is that you're not allowed to, make moral judgments against people. And now they seem to get upset every time somebody is like, Diamond and Steel or whatever, or Diamond and Silk, whatever their fucking name is, like they just suck. And that's why they don't have a bigger viewership, because they're idiots and they're jokes. Do you worry about the future of free speech and of a liberal society where people are willing to agree to disagree in very public settings?
No, I don't know. I don't know what I'm worried about, to be completely honest. I'm not sure that we ever lived in a society where people agreed to disagree. I think most of us didn't know just how much we were in disagreement with so many other people before social media. Like, there's just a bunch of things, a bunch of opinions I didn't know my friends held because, through sort of exploratory conversations, we sort of learned what not to bring up with the other person. I agree with Robbie that I think that the most productive way forward for a lot of these disputes is for the person who feels like they've been wronged or offended to take a sort of softer touch with the offender in sort of private settings. But I also think like the baker should be able to fire the customer who's talking shit about him. Like, why not? Like,
the worker, not the customer. The customer is always right. For God's sake, if the customer isn't always right, we've all been living a tremendous lie.
No, I think also fuck the customer sometimes too.
Yeah,
like anybody who's worked in retail or restaurants can tell you that like that's some bullshit that the customer is always right. But so I don't exactly know what I'm scared of. I know that I have been disabused of the notion that like you can ever get everybody on the same page about any one thing.
Right.
Which, it seems that for a long time, people in the media in particular have been operating under the assumption that like if you can just close the knowledge gap, you can build a sort of consensus in favor of a truth with a capital T. And I don't think that's true anymore. And that kind of has like a domino effect on a bunch of other things that I'm thinking about.
Well, this is the great lie of the phenomenal hair-lipped German philosopher Jürgen Habermas, which is that if we just talk about it long enough, we will come to total agreement. And in fact,
the truth is if we talk about it long enough, we'll die. And then
we'll have wasted our lives. We'll have wasted our lives and kind of forced conversations to come to an agreement when it's like, you know what, I just want to go out. It's a nice day. I want to eat some pistachio ice cream. What do you mean you can only eat peach? Peach is, apodictically certainly better, blah, blah, blah. We are going to leave it here. I want to thank Robbie Suave and Mike Riggs of Reason for talking about not the legal regulation of Facebook, but, what kind of society do we want to live in where we can express or we can agree to disagree, and also where platforms or businesses or whatever just say, no, get out. We don't want to hear from you anymore. Guys, thank you very much.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you.
This has been the Reason Podcast. I've been your host, Nick Gillespie. Please subscribe to us at iTunes, at Google Play Music, at Reason.com, at whatever service you want. And when you're there, rate and review us. Thanks for listening.